I suck at racing games. Partially because I haven't really played one in a very long time, and partially because the newer wave of them is much more simulation-y than I'm used to. But I still really like them if one sort of, does everything that I want in a racing game. I used to play a lot of Need for Speed Underground and the other much older Need for Speed games on PC. That was a long time ago, but they were really, really fun. And since then, I've noticed, games like Dirt, for instance, have become popular, and they are much more, I wouldn't say, like, enthusiast, but they're a lot less arcadey than previous racing games have generally been. And also, Gran Turismo, one of my other kind of favorites of the day, that used to play a lot of Gran Turismo on PS1, has went that way as well. And sort of the king of that mountain is Forza Motorsport, which is like a super enthusiast, pro-level racing simulator. Very different from a traditional racing game, and people happily spend like hundreds of hours in that. And I've always heard of Forza Horizon, which was the open-world spin-off series to that, and was always really interested because it seemed to me kind of like a mixing of the Forza Motorsport mainline series with something like Need for Speed Underground. And I never had the chance to try them until now, so this is Forza Horizon 4, and it turns out it's basically exactly what I didn't know I wanted in a racing game. First of all, it's beautiful, which isn't really that important in a racing game because of how fast you're going, but it is really, really good looking. I'm very sorry for whatever YouTube does to this video, and video processing does to this video, but I did all I can to make it look as good as possible. It's not going to look nearly as good as it actually does, but hey, we're getting there. Turning off motion blur helps. Also, motion blur is terrible anyway. But, yeah, it'll make any video look really bad. So, just a pro tip there for anyone that wants to record this game or any game with motion blur. But, the real, it captures the English countryside very, very well. And obviously, in my opinion, things like the Scottish landscape is one of the prettiest places in the world. And this place definitely does that pretty good justice. As you can see, this sort of sunset going on here is very nice looking with lots of really good lighting and shadow effects. And the cars themselves, the main focus, look incredible. They're very realistically modeled, and even down to little tiny details like the right speedometers and tachometers and things in there for your usual manufacturer correct parts, things like that. They look really good. Even the reflections, which don't even have cranked up all the way, I don't know why, I just discovered that after recording, look really good, even though they're not maxed out. But, yeah, it's a beautiful game. But the main point is really how much variety it has. There are so many things that you can do in this game, which I think is necessary for an open-world racing game, because open-world games in general have that kind of aptitude for repetition, and a lot of people really don't like that. A racing game would be even more so, because the only thing you can do is race, right? So that seems like it would have that problem even more. But they've done a really good job of putting so many different aspects of racing into the game that it's hard to get bored. There's just a ridiculous amount to do. You can, if you want, just fiddle around with the open world and drive around like an idiot and find these various collectible signs that give you rewards and things like that. That's in there. Or you can also do stuff like, take a crappy old truck and modify it for drag racing, or relive the Need for Speed Underground era and buy yourself a Nissan Skyline and modify it for like drift spec street races. Pretty much anything you can think of with a car, you can basically get one and deck it out for that purpose, which is really, really cool. And here I'm actually doing a mission where I'm supposed to drive this Ferrari very fast, and I'm having a bit of a hard time because this is the first, like, really sort of almost hypercar-esque vehicle that I've actually driven, and the first Ferrari I've actually driven in the game, and it handles very differently from what I was used to. The cornering seems to have a very kind of sensitive nature, where it changes from very high grip cornering at lower speeds to almost no grip whatsoever at higher speeds, and the sort of gate between those two is absolutely tiny, and it's very easy to just slip around and or slow down while cornering, and then suddenly grip happens and you turn really fast all of a sudden. It's interesting to drive the different vehicles and actually see how different they really are. The amount of customization you can do is huge. You can do anything from just very light tuning, like changing the camber of the wheels front and back, and changing the stiffness of the springs and the suspension, just very small things like that will make a tangible difference in the vehicle, but those are very, slight adjustments, to much larger adjustments like putting on full body kits or even dropping a new engine entirely into a vehicle, and they are manufacturer correct engines as well, which means that some cars don't actually have an alternative engine, but a lot of them do. I actually have one vehicle that has like 6 different choices, and I wouldn't recommend the higher choices in that particular vehicle because it becomes nearly uncontrollable. But it's really cool how much you can do. And, if you envision a vehicle in your mind as a sort of specialized something, you want to drift with it, you want to drag with it, whatever it is, you can definitely get that here and make it into what you want, which is super cool to be able to do. Like I have this really old Beetle right here that I decided to spec for basically like Baja racing and extreme off-road kind of stuff, and it works. It works really well, actually. It doesn't have quite as much raw power as some of the other, buggies that actually start out as buggies rather than being modified into one, but it's very light in comparison, and it's got like a crap load of torque, so it can do all sorts of fun things. And really this kind of exemplifies what I tried to do in the background. I tried to get a bunch of footage of different types of races and things to show you what all you could do, and this doesn't really even scratch the surface. There's just so much. The game has a really stellar presentation. From small things like the different viewpoints you can select, to the way the speedometer and the map and everything is displayed on the screen, and the nice little racing line to help guide you, which you can turn off, by the way, to the rewind feature, which we'll talk about more in a minute. The menus and things, it's all very slick, very well presented. I will say, though, that some of the in-game menus, like the start menu and things like that, are a little bit form over function. They can be a little difficult to navigate at first and require maybe more button presses than is absolutely necessary to get to your individual choice, because of the way they're laid out kind of, strangely. They're not incredibly obtuse, they're just not as user-friendly as they could be, simply because they want to look really slick, if you get what I mean. And, overall, though, the game's presentation is definitely a high point. From the, pre-race warm-ups to the actual races themselves. It's all very, very slick and smooth and runs very well as well. It's pretty cool. But I want to talk about the rewind feature for a minute, because you probably noticed when I screwed up a couple times, you're able to rewind. And this is really neat. This isn't the first game to do this by any means, but I think it's implemented in here in a very neat way, because it's a crutch that is useful for getting you to walk, but if you want to run, you're going to have to get rid of it eventually, if you get what I mean. It's very useful for discovering the limits of the handling and the speed and things like that of a vehicle, and how best to drive it in a race in certain conditions without having to restart the race every time something goes wrong. And then eventually, you're meant to sort of take those lessons that you learned from being able to rewind and very quickly change your actions to the point where you actually instinctively know these things now, and you don't have to rewind, so you get rid of it. And it's meant to basically be a sort of skill crutch that helps you figure out different parts of the game a little bit easier, because this is, although not nearly as simulation-esque as Forza Motorsport, it is still one of the more, it's really pretty much the most complex in terms of handling of things racing game that I've ever played. And it is arcadey, more arcadey than Motorsport, but that's not saying a lot. And in the difficulty settings, you can actually change it to be even more simulation-like, to the point where your engine and tires can actually be damaged and even destroyed during races if you abuse them. And damage to the car is actually not just physically modeled, but has an effect on your performance. So if you want to make it even more towards the Motorsport mainline series, you can. But yeah, the rewind feature helps with this sort of learning process. Maybe you're in a new car, like I am here, driving this Batmobile-looking Lamborghini, and you don't really know what to expect, so you turn on rewind to be able to learn more quickly, and then once you've sort of reached the ceiling of what you feel you can do with rewind, you turn it off and try and learn better lessons that way. It's a really cool system that I really enjoy in racing games, and I think it plays a great role here. And as far as the actual difficulty customization, it is just as diverse as the car customization. There's a lot you can do to change the average difficulty of the game, from going against harder AIs, which is, I'm on the expert level AIs, which there are 2 more above that difficulties. I think one is called Pro and the next is called Unbeatable. I haven't been winning in first place against the expert level guys enough to make me want to switch yet. But yeah, it will tell you that you're winning a bunch a little easily, and it's time to switch up to the next level of difficulty, and you can do that if you want. And you're rewarded. Everything that ups the difficulty of the game also increases the credit reward that you get from winning. And vice versa. Everything that makes the game easier will reduce the amount of credits that you get. So things like going against harder AI and disabling the rewind system will get you more net gains per race, while also helping you build your skill up. It's a pretty cool system, actually. And there's a lot you can do in the customization. It's not just those two features. There's significantly more. Like I said, the damage modeling and things. Let's see, handling assist kind of difficulty. All sorts of stuff like that. And there's also a very significant multiplayer focus to the game. Not forced on you, which I like. You can go into a solo session whenever you want and just not deal with that. But there's a lot of player-created content in the game. Everything from car liveries that you can actually create in the in-game editor and then save and upload and other people can use them. Car tuning, so if you tune your car with a specific set of upgrades and parts and tweaks, you can actually save that just for yourself or upload it and other people can download those and test them out, which is really cool, and even rate them. And even things like entire races, entire routes through races can actually be created from scratch with the blueprint system in games, so players can actually create their own events if they want to. And there are even these event sort of arenas that are specifically for multiplayer purposes that allow you to all get together in various sort of arena settings that are themed. One of them is like a train yard, one of them is an old sort of, looks like abandoned dirt racing kind of facility. There's a bunch of them. And you can play different multiplayer game modes in those, sort of host a game. And I think 3 or 4, maybe even more different ones. So that's cool, actually. I haven't really used, personally, most of the multiplayer features yet, but I like that they're there. And also gotta, of course, touch on the idea of how many vehicles there actually are in this game. There are a lot. There are about 450 different vehicles, I guess, because they're not all cars, to choose from. And they range from the common rarity all the way up to legendary in terms of how difficult they are to find and obtain. Obviously, legendary is very expensive, but also quite rare to see, which has a bit of prestige to it. And most cars you can buy with in-game currency, of course. And some of the others you have to find. There are 15 cars, specifically. They're all legendary rarity that you can find in barns around the place, and then sort of wait for them to be restored after you found them, because of course they're in really awful condition when you first roll across them, and then they'll be added to your garage after fully restored, and you have a new car now that you couldn't get in a different way, which is really cool, and again adds even more just stuff to do in the open world exploration. And there are just all kinds of cars in here, and the thing to really talk about, I suppose, is not just how accurate they are, how accurately modeled and well realized the vehicles are, but how different each one is, and how much they change from just small tweaks to the tuning, different upgrades, add a wing on the back, extra downforce, all sorts of stuff like that will definitely change a vehicle tangibly while you're driving it, and the amount and type of change isn't identical between cars. So, one car, even in the same class, like just one sort of muscle car style of like retro muscle car will not perform the same with the same upgrades as another one, which is important because the entire point of the game is sort of personal preference modification to make your own garage filled with your own things for whatever use you want them for, and it definitely realizes that to a pretty enthusiast level extent. You can do just about anything except for fly. I suppose you can't fly. Well, you can jump pretty high, but you can't fly. And overall, I would say with the just ridiculous amount of content that's in the game, the price tag is, of course, a AAA price tag of $60, is not bad at all. There's a lot here, and if you're a racing game fan, then I think you're going to enjoy it. And I think the amount of customization in the game in every aspect, both from the actual vehicles to the difficulty and how arcadey versus how simulation it is a really big deal, because this allows people from different backgrounds of racing games to actually get into it. If you really don't like the extremely punishing simulation level racing games, you can tune it to be very arcadey and play with a controller and enjoy yourself. If you want to be like a super enthusiast and you're used to playing lots of normal Forza Motorsports and all that kind of stuff, and you want it to be as hard as possible and as accurate as possible, and damage modeling is on and everything, play it with a racing wheel, you can do that too. And everything in between. So I was very pleasantly surprised, I suppose, because this is not a series I have ever played any game in, any Forza game at all of either type. And this is my first one, so going into it, I definitely will be keeping an eye on them, and they're still adding cars and events into this game through updates that are free, and others that do cost you. So, you know, decide what you will for yourself, but I would say they're not expensive. And the other thing I didn't really touch on is the fact that the seasons change. There are seasonal events, and the actual roadway characteristics are changed by the weather. So this is spring that I'm in right now, and it seems about every week it rotates, so obviously it's going to be summer after this, which means a lot less rain. Spring is very rainy. The game even tracks tire temperature and things like that, so it makes me wonder if summer conditions, especially for like Baja races in the snow, or the sand, are going to be changed by the summer heat, and some other stuff like that. And then of course autumn, it gets a bit rainy again, probably windy, and it's very pretty. And then you've even got things like winter bringing in the snow and the ice. Some areas are only accessible in certain seasons, like frozen lake drag races, for instance. And, well, the roadways get a lot more slick. So, yeah, there's a lot here. The only, I suppose, really negative thing I have to say about it is the fact that it is on the Microsoft Marketplace exclusively. You cannot get it on GOG or Steam or anything like that. That's just something to deal with these kinds of games, although it is a fairly pro-consumer marketplace. You know, if you buy it on Xbox One or PC, you can play it on either system with just one copy. You don't have to buy a copy for each. So that's cool for those of you who own one of those and want to take your progress between the two. That's definitely cool. And I've had a lot of fun with it, and I really can't recommend it more because it's brought me back to an age of racing games that I used to play with a lot of modern polish and stuff like that I'm not familiar with until now. So I'd say they definitely did a good job creating that feel, and I haven't really come across that in any other place. So that is Forza Horizon 4. Very good recommendation from me, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.